and people knew what the stocks were worth, and they knew that they were cheap, but they were afraid to take a position.
Yeah.
So if you're someone, you tell a good story with David Tepper, or why don't you?
March of '09, I'm just repeating what he said, in March of '09, he had decided that it was either the end of Western civilization as we knew it, or the world's greatest buying opportunity. As he played that out, he said, if it's the end of Western civilization, probably no one will care about my portfolio returns. So I'm going all in, and he was #1 portfolio manager, large cap portfolio manager that year, made a lot of money. People weren't willing to invest. Other people may have thought they were cheap, but he stepped up. He invested when people were unwilling to do that, and he ended up being right? A big part of investing is being right. So that was the case. So what you talk about are these dislocations, and having the ability to hold the position is a key part of that. The other great story is that Lloyd Blankfeld called Buffett in March of '09. He didn't call you or me. And he gave him a sweet piece of paper that conceptually we all would have purchased, but I don't know about you, I didn't have 10 billion liquid at the moment. And there was some reputational advantage to going with Buffett. So those are examples, sort of extreme examples, where they point out that notion of being able to trade, hold a position when other people are unwilling to do that.
Yeah, I think one of the things you're touching on is behavioral differences and emotions and how they impact investors. So the information can be readily available and analyzed by everyone, but you need a human to actually go in and purchase the stock. And I think the understanding biases are one of the most important thing an investor can do. Once you finish undergrad, if you have a degree in finance, you can build a DCF. You essentially could do what every guy on Wall Street is doing. So I think at the end of the day, you need to be able to understand, how businesses make money, what different drivers are going to change in driving your model. But then you need to marry that with, understanding of biases and human behavior.
Like a question for the authors. Why did you not include behavioral advantage as one of the 3 advantages?
Oh,
Who
we
gets to
did.
drive the truck? Who gets to drive this truck? I'm going.
Yeah, go.
We do. We have a whole
Well,
chapter
so.
devoted to behavioral. We debated this a long time. I came to the party thinking there are no behavioral advantages, and Paul came to the party thinking there are no behavioral advantages. So we argued until we figured it out. It ends up that, and this is a second lecture we could give you, but chapter, must be chapter 6, right? 5 is.
No, 6 is wisdom of the crowd,
Yeah,
7 is behavior.
yeah. So in Wisdom of the Crowds, chapter 6, we talk about how the market really functions. We use a model called Wisdom of the Crowds. And what you figure out fairly quickly, Wisdom of the Crowds, is for the Wisdom of the Crowds to fail, it only fails 2 ways. One is the lack of diversity among the crowd, or some sort of external bias that's pulling everybody away from their estimate. And the first is, the only place behavioral could come in is, guess what? The crowd is acting the same, diversity has dropped. And so if there is a behavioral aspect in the market, and what Noah was hinting at a moment ago, and what Elliot's asking, it comes under the fact that the individuals in the market are no longer have a diverse set of opinions, they're thinking the same way. We call this groupthink in management, it's groupthink in the market. So behavioral, that doesn't exist, it's a function of analytical. Your ability to see through that and see that everybody's on one side of the trade is, in fact, we would argue, an analytical advantage, not a behavioral advantage. So if a behavioral advantage exists, it's because you've been able to see that there's a bias that's seeped up to the crowd level. So it's no different than an analytical advantage.
Yeah, all that are behavioral advantages is that, again, you're looking at the same data set that everybody else is looking at, and you come to a different conclusion. So a behavioral advantage is really just an analytical advantage. It's just a subset of that. There's no separate behavioral advantage.
And just to drive the truck a little bit faster, this is one of our many things we get worked up about, is behavioral aspects. The crowd behavior does bubble up. We're the first to admit it. But they're a lot less frequent than people want to believe. At the macro level, everyone talks about the housing crisis, or they talk about the tech crisis from 20 years ago. or they'll talk about something else. Well, that's 3 in a 20-year period, and we don't talk about the fact that the market behaved the other 17 years. No one ever talks about it. So number one, they do seep up. They're not as frequent as you think. They're incredibly hard to game because guess what? The definition of a crowd or a mob is you're part of it. You're carrying a pitchfork just as much. So this sort of notion that there's a behavioral advantage, I think it's an analytical advantage at best. I don't think they're that frequent. I think they're incredibly hard to take advantage of.
So you're all practitioners, and you presented a framework that I think doesn't surprise any of us.
It shouldn't.
You have data, you have analysis. So you presented a framework that's pretty obvious, but you articulated it well. And you spent 4 years doing that. What makes you guys a better investor now than 4 years ago? And so we might read your book, and I'm thinking, should I bother reading your book and get an advantage from reading your book? But you haven't read it, you've written it. So I'm just trying to see, in your perspective, in these 4 years, what makes you a better investor?
I'd say that you bring up an interesting point because we like, ironically, you aren't our primary audience for the book. The primary audience is like college students, MBA students, recent graduates from college and recent MBA graduates. Now we did that very deliberately, and kind of the punchline is because practitioners, when my first book came out, Value Investing from Graham to Buffett and Beyond, people said it's really obvious. So I said I didn't want to deal.
I liked it.
Yeah, so I said I really didn't want to deal with hearing from people that it's obvious, so I want to be able to say, you're not the audience. Now, that being said, practitioners that read it, they've gotten a lot out of it. And because it gives you a framework to fit all of your existing knowledge into a much more effective framework. So, and that framework will allow you to encode and retrieve information a lot easier. So I've spoken with people that are 10, 15, 20 years out of the business who've read the book, and they say, well, there's nothing in there that's really new, but I learned a lot. And I'm like, okay, wait, if there's nothing new, how did you learn a lot? Like, talk about that a little bit more. And they had all of this information in their minds that was just like scattered all over the place. And what we gave them was different categories to fit it neatly into. So now all of a sudden, they want the information, they know exactly where to go get it in their minds.
Yeah, just echoing what Paul said, our original idea was to write a book. I teach at business school, he's taught at business school. We think that there's a real need there. Some of the former students are here, some of my very recent former students are here. And what we try to do is give them a framework. We've been delighted with the reception we've had in the practitioner world, where they have said, it gives them a framework, a lattice work, if you will, back from the Munger days, way to put all these things into place. Some of the stuff we talk about in Wisdom of the Crowds, I think, will surprise practitioners because it will give them a better articulation of where edges really come from. So we've been.
That's what
people
makes us better investors.
Yeah.
Is that we can really
I
identify
really
it.
know exactly where to look and the edges, and when I'm kidding myself. I've gotten to the point where now I have a pretty good idea when I'm making it up, which is, I think, really important. So I encourage people to, in a business that pays well, you know, it does cost $31.09 or something like that on Amazon. Everybody that we've encouraged to read it has come back and said they've learned a lot. It's been very helpful in that. One of the things that Paul talked about, I learned a lot from Paul in this process, but one of the ones that was really great is this notion that Derek Thompson came along with, is what we call a familiar surprise. And what really takes off in the world is something that's what we call a familiar surprise, in that there's either the packaging is familiar but the content is different, or the content is familiar but the packaging is very different. And I think what we've done in this book is take a bunch of things you all know and we put it in a package that no one's seen before. Display it and really present it in a cogent way that's never been done before. And I suspect that you will frame what you know much more effectively after reading the book. Now, my smartass response is we actually get paid on purchase and not consumption. So as long as you buy it, if it sits on the shelf, we're cool. So you don't necessarily have to read it, but we've been.
I can chime in here. So, you
Well,
read.
did you actually read the book?
I did read the book.
And it's okay if you didn't.
I did. Okay. Do I need a book report?
Yeah. No, just a recommendation.
But what they're highlighting here is that, yes, the market is efficient, but when you take that all into consideration, you need to think about, can I create a systematic way of perhaps looking at the market differently, looking at the same data sets differently, or finding unique data sets that no one else is looking at? Those are things you can do to help put the odds in your favor. But for one thing, when I helped launch Incline Global with Jeff Lignelli, who's David Tepper was one of our seed investors. But in the first year, we sat around the table and a few guys and a bunch of Bloombergs and talked about how are we going to outperform the market? How are we going to beat other guys doing the same thing? And we concluded that you need to look at the world in a different way, a very systematic way. And this is something that was sort of the legacy of Charlie Munger. And he had a discussion in 1994, I believe, at USC, where he talked about this concept of mental models. And he basically said a mental model is a way to organize disparate facts into a repeatable and reusable pattern. So what does that mean? So for example, we built mental models that we invest around. We call them frameworks. And for one, we invest using a turnaround framework. And so how do we create a turnaround framework? Well, I studied turnarounds that had been very successful over time and distilled it down to a handful of common characteristics and used this as a playbook to look at potential turnaround candidates. And we have various different frameworks we use. And so, well, everyone else in the market is looking at what's EPS can be next quarter or what's gross margin this year, and looking at the same sell-side research the same way, we're looking at things in a framework which allows us to have, there's phases of these frameworks. And so really, the takeaway from this book is you need to create a systematic way of perhaps doing something differently to allow you to beat the market.
No, when you guys have been investing for a while successfully when the book finally came out, and then you read it. Did you find that it reinforced what you did? Did it change anything you did? What was your reaction as you read through the book? Now, we've known you a long time, so you've gotten some of this. My son's been reading the book, he goes, Dad, I've heard this so many times, but repeat. So some of this was repeat for you, but what was your reaction as you read the book against your process?
Yeah, so in terms of process, I think it sort of reinforced what we're doing at Incline Global and what frankly a lot of great investors are doing. If you speak to Paul Tudor Jones, he has his own playbook he uses for trading rates or commodities, and so he has his own pattern recognition tool, which is essentially what we're doing. But the one thing in terms of the book, what I think it does really well is it talks about varied perception, and the way I frame that is that investing 1.0 is trying to figure out if this is a good or bad business. So most people that are amateur stock investors, you ask them why they own Apple or Google, they'll say it's a great business, and they'll explain why it's a great business. To me, that's investing 1.0. Investing 2.0 is sort of what does everyone expect them to do? Sure, Apple could be great, but is the stock pricing in that they're going to sell 20 million iPhones or 40 million iPhones? So I think they do a good job of understanding the 2.0 version and how you make money in this market is tied to variant perception. It's not just what's a good company and a bad company. And another thing that I'm not sure we're going to talk much about, but they have an entire section on the art of pitching a stock. And so I've been in the business for 10 years now. I started as the most junior of junior analysts at a research team, and now I'm an MD at a fund, not a portfolio manager yet. But throughout the whole process, you start to realize how important it is to be able to pitch a stock. And I come across so many brilliant stock jocks, like people that know businesses inside and out, and they don't succeed in the industry because they're not articulate, or they just don't know how to pitch a stock. And so those are a few things that I thought the book did well. And if you speak to anyone younger who's looking to get into the industry, I think they need to understand the importance of being able to pitch a stock.
So this is a question for you, Paul. You said that with the GDP we have, we should have 10,000 public companies. Why is the number not